Dr. Sarah Chen stared at her computer screen, her coffee growing cold beside her keyboard. It was 2:34 a.m. at the SETI Institute in California, and she had been about to head home when the signal appeared. At first, she thought she was too tired and seeing things. But there it was, clear, strong, and definitely not natural. "Hey, Mike," she called out to her colleague down the hall. "Can you come check this?" Mike Rodriguez had been working at SETI for 15 years, and he had seen hundreds of false alarms. He walked over slowly, expecting another disappointment. But when he looked at Sarah's screen, his eyes went wide. "Call everyone," he said quietly. "Call them now." Within an hour, the small facility was buzzing with activity. Scientists who had been sleeping at home were now crowded around monitors, their faces lit by blue screen light. The signal was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was structured, repeated, and most importantly, it was aimed directly at Earth. "It's a message," Dr. James Wilson, the head of the institute, announced to the room. "And we're about to decode it." The next few hours were intense. Computers worked to break down the signal's pattern while scientists argued about its meaning. It was Dr. Chen who made the breakthrough at 6:47 a.m. "It's using mathematical sequences as a base," she explained, pointing to her calculations. "The same way we would try to communicate with aliens. They're speaking our language, or at least the universal language of math." The message, when they finally decoded it, was short and terrifying. "Your species has 30 Earth days to surrender and join the Galactic Empire. Refusal will result in extinction." The room fell silent. Through the windows, they could see the sun rising over the California hills, the world still peaceful and unaware of how everything had just changed. Within hours, similar reports came in from other listening stations around the world. Fast in China, Arecibo in Puerto Rico, and facilities in Russia and Australia all confirmed the same message. There was no doubt. Earth had received its first alien contact, and it was a threat. The news spread quickly, first to government agencies, then to world leaders, and finally, by mid-afternoon, to the public. Stock markets plunged, religious leaders called for calm, and social media exploded with theories and reactions. But in a quiet corner of the SETI facility, Dr. Chen noticed something that others had missed. She was looking at the technical data of the transmission itself, not its contents. "Dr. Wilson," she called out, her voice steady despite her excitement. "Look at these patterns in the carrier wave. The way they're transmitting this, it's not just a message. They've accidentally shown us how their faster-than-light communication works." Wilson looked at her data and slowly nodded. "And they included their coordinates," he added, pointing to a regular pattern in the signal. "They're so confident, they didn't even try to hide where they are." "They think we're primitive," Mike said, joining them. "They don't expect us to understand any of this." Dr. Chen smiled for the first time since the message arrived. "Then they've made their first mistake." As panic spread across the globe, a small group of scientists began sharing their findings with government agencies. The Empire had meant to frighten Earth into submission. Instead, they had given humanity exactly what it needed: knowledge of their technology and their location. The clock was ticking. 30 days until the deadline. But Earth's first advantage was already in hand, hidden in the very threat meant to destroy them. General Laura Hayes stood at the window of the Pentagon's underground command center, watching dozens of screens showing news from around the world. It had been 3 days since the alien message, and for once, Earth's nations weren't fighting each other. They were too busy preparing for a much bigger fight. "The Chinese delegation has arrived," her assistant reported. "The Russians and Indians are already in Conference Room B." Hayes nodded. Just last month, these countries had been arguing about border disputes. Now they were sharing military secrets like old friends. Fear was a powerful unifier. In the conference room, Dr. Chen from SETI was explaining her findings to the gathered military leaders and scientists. Her hands moved quickly as she pointed to different parts of her presentation. The Empire's transmission technology is advanced, but it follows patterns we can understand, she explained, using simple drawings to make her point. Think of it like a very complex radio. We might not have their equipment, but we can learn to interrupt their signals. A Russian general raised his hand. How do we know they're not watching us right now? Oh, they are, Chen replied with a small smile. We've detected their scout ships at the edge of our solar system, but they're about to see exactly what they expect. Nothing. Operation Silent Earth began the next day. Every satellite in orbit changed its broadcasting pattern. The internet was restructured to run through underwater cables. Radio telescopes around the world went quiet. To any watching aliens, Earth must have seemed like it was holding its breath. But underground, in bunkers and secret facilities across the planet, humanity was far from silent. In Tokyo, engineers worked on converting old radio towers into signal jammers. In Silicon Valley, tech companies reprogrammed thousands of satellites. In London, code breakers studied the alien transmission patterns, looking for weaknesses. They expect us to either surrender or make noise, General Hayes told the United Nations Security Council in a secret session. They're waiting for begging, for threats, or for signs we're preparing weapons. Instead, we're giving them nothing. And while they wait, we're learning. The alien ships remained at their position near Pluto, watching. Their sophisticated sensors scanned Earth, but the planet's sudden digital silence confused them. According to their data, Earth's technology level shouldn't allow for such a coordinated shutdown. 2 weeks into the silence, Dr. Chen made another breakthrough. She had been working with a team of international scientists in an underground facility in Switzerland, studying the alien transmission patterns. Look at this, she told her colleagues, pointing to a complex diagram. Their whole communication system is built on perfect order. Every signal follows exact patterns. They've optimized everything so much that they've lost flexibility. And that's good for us? Asked a young Indian programmer. That's excellent for us, Chen replied. Because humans are really good at making chaos. In military bases around the world, soldiers trained for a new kind of war. Instead of tanks and planes, they learned to use signal jammers and electronic warfare tools. Engineers converted commercial satellites into weapons that could confuse rather than destroy. As the deadline's halfway point approached, humanity had transformed itself. The noisy, divided planet had become quiet and focused. But it wasn't the silence of fear or submission. It was the silence of preparation. In her Pentagon office, General Hayes received a report that made her smile. The alien ships had moved closer, probably trying to figure out why Earth was so quiet. They were about to learn that silence didn't mean surrender. It meant humanity was getting ready to fight back in ways the Empire would never expect. 20 days remained until the Empire's deadline, and the underground facility in Switzerland had become a hive of activity. Coffee cups littered the desks, and tired scientists moved between computer stations like sleepwalkers. But no one wanted to rest, not when they were so close to a breakthrough. Dr. Chen hadn't slept in 36 hours when her computer started beeping urgently. She blinked at the screen, making sure she wasn't seeing things. Professor Williams. She called out, her voice shaking with excitement. I think we did it. The old professor hurried over, adjusting his glasses. On the screen, a simulation showed how the Empire's ships communicated with each other. But more importantly, it showed how to disrupt those communications. It's like they never considered anyone would try to hack them, Chen explained, pointing to the data. Their systems are advanced, but they're rigid. Everything has to be perfect for them to work. Williams nodded slowly. And we're going to make sure nothing is perfect. The discovery spread quickly through secure channels. In the Pentagon, General Hayes watched a demonstration where a small device, built using the principles Chen's team had discovered, completely scrambled a test signal designed to mimic the alien technology. How many of these can we build? She asked her technical team. That's the beautiful part, replied Major Torres. her head of engineering. "We don't need to build new devices. We can modify our existing satellites to do this. Thousands of them." In orbit, communication satellites quietly received new programming. GPS satellites had their software updated. Even old weather satellites were repurposed. Earth's orbital network was becoming a weapon, but not one that would shoot or explode. It would blind and confuse. Meanwhile, in a hidden facility beneath the Australian outback, another team made progress. They had been studying the patterns of the Empire's scout ships, trying to understand how they moved and watched. "They're like perfect machines," explained Dr. Mohammed Patel, the lead researcher. "Every movement is calculated. Every scan follows the same pattern. They never deviate. And that's their weakness," asked the Australian general overseeing the project. "Exactly," Patel replied with a grin. "Because humans? We're messy, unpredictable. We're going to show them that sometimes chaos is stronger than order." Around the world, military forces practiced new tactics. Instead of traditional warfare, they learned to create electronic noise, to move in ways that would confuse the Empire's perfect systems, to fight without fighting. In her quarters late one night, General Hayes received a secure call from Dr. Chen. "We've finished the final simulations," Chen reported, her face tired but proud on the screen. "Operation Blackout is ready. We can trigger it whenever you give the word." Hayes looked at the countdown clock on her wall. 18 days remained until the deadline. "How confident are you that this will work?" "The Empire has built their entire military around perfect communication and coordination," Chen replied. "Take that away, and even their strongest ships become vulnerable. They'll be fighting blind while we can see everything." Hayes nodded slowly. "And the risk? If we're wrong, humanity ends," Chen said simply. "But if we do nothing, we end anyway. At least this way, we go down fighting." The general was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Fighting smart, not hard. Very human of us." As the call ended, Hayes looked at the latest satellite images of the Empire's scout ships. They were still watching, still waiting for Earth to break its silence and beg for mercy. They would learn soon enough that humanity had spent its silent days preparing something very special for them. The Empire had given Earth one warning. They were about to learn that was one warning too many. The warning came at dawn, Madagascar time. 3 Imperial ships, each the size of a small city, appeared in the upper atmosphere. They glowed with a strange purple light as they descended, their engines humming with power that made the air itself vibrate. In her Pentagon command center, General Hayes watched the live feed with a tight jaw. "Status of evacuation. Complete, ma'am," her aide reported. "Madagascar was emptied 3 days ago. Every civilian is safe in underground shelters across mainland Africa." The Empire had chosen Madagascar as their demonstration target, probably thinking its island location would contain the damage. They didn't know that humanity had been preparing for exactly this kind of attack. Dr. Chen sat at her station in the Swiss facility, surrounded by screens showing data from the approaching ships. "Their communication patterns are exactly like we predicted," she said into her headset. "They're using standard Imperial protocols." Around the world, military commanders watched and waited. The plan was in place. Everything depended on timing. The lead Imperial ship broadcast a message across all frequencies. "This is your final chance to surrender. Watch and learn the price of defiance." In response, they received only silence. The Imperial ships descended to firing position, their weapons charging. The air crackled with energy. But just as they reached the optimal attack altitude, something changed. "Now," General Hayes ordered. Across Earth's orbit, thousands of modified satellites activated at once. They began broadcasting a chaos of signals, each one designed to interfere with Imperial technology in a specific way. The effect was instant and devastating. The lead Imperial ship suddenly tilted sideways, its perfect formation breaking. The second ship's weapons powered down unexpectedly. The third ship began spinning slowly, its navigation systems corrupted by the flood of conflicting data. Their systems are failing, Dr. Chen reported, her eyes fixed on her screens. They can't handle the signal interference. All their computers are getting confused by multiple contradictory commands. The Imperial ships tried to compensate, their automated systems working desperately to make sense of the chaos. But they had never been designed to handle this kind of electronic warfare. Their perfect, rigid systems were being overwhelmed by human-made chaos. They're losing altitude, someone announced. They can't maintain their flight patterns. General Hayes watched as the massive ships struggled against Earth's gravity. Coordinate with the Indian Ocean Fleet. Those ships are going down, and we want them. The first Imperial ship crashed into the ocean 200 miles east of Madagascar. The second followed 3 minutes later. The third managed to stay airborne the longest, but eventually succumbed to gravity and joined its companions in the warm Indian Ocean waters. Within hours, international recovery teams were at work. Special submarines, prepared months in advance, descended to retrieve what they could from the alien vessels. "Ma'am," Major Torres reported to General Hayes, "initial scans show at least 2 of the ships are largely intact. We can study their technology directly now." Hayes nodded. "And the Empire?" No response yet. Their scout ships near Pluto are still watching, but they haven't moved. In Switzerland, Dr. Chen finally allowed herself to smile. "We just took down 3 of their most advanced ships without firing a single shot," she said to Professor Williams. "And now we have their actual technology to study." Williams looked at the countdown clock. 16 days remained until the deadline. "They'll respond," he said quietly. "This was just a demonstration force. The real attack will be much bigger." "Yes," Chen agreed, "but now we know our plan works, and we have 16 days to learn everything we can from those ships." She looked at her data screens, where the first images of the recovered Imperial vessels were coming in. They thought they were giving us a lesson. Instead, they just handed us exactly what we needed. At a hastily constructed facility on the coast of Madagascar, Dr. Chen stared in amazement at the recovered alien technology. The Imperial ship's control room was massive, but something about it seemed oddly familiar. "It's like looking at a super-advanced version of our own technology," she told General Hayes, who had flown in to see the discoveries firsthand. "But there's something strange about it." A team of international scientists worked around them, scanning every inch of the alien vessels. The ships had been carefully lifted from the ocean and moved to this secure location. Water still dripped from some of their panels. Professor Williams approached them, holding a tablet with his findings. "You need to see this," he said, his voice excited. "We found something fascinating about their computer systems." He pulled up a diagram on the main screen. "Everything in their ships is standardized. Every wire, every circuit, every piece of code. It's all exactly the same as every other Imperial ship. Isn't that good engineering?" Hayes asked, frowning. "It's too perfect," Chen replied, suddenly understanding. "They've optimized everything so much that they've lost the ability to adapt. Look at their repair systems." She pointed to a damaged section of the ship. "When our interference caused this panel to malfunction, their automated systems tried to fix it the same way 6 times, failing each time. They couldn't try a different approach." "They've traded creativity for efficiency," Williams added. "Their technology is incredibly advanced, but it's rigid, inflexible." In another part of the facility, Dr. Mohammed Patel made an equally important discovery. He called everyone to his workstation, where he had been studying the ship's communication systems. "Their entire fleet operates like a single computer network," he explained. "Every ship is connected, sharing data constantly. It makes them incredibly efficient, but it's a weakness we can exploit," Chen finished, her eyes lighting up. "If we can disrupt their network, we can confuse their entire fleet at once," Hayes said, understanding the implications. 15 days remained until the deadline, and the work continued around the clock. Teams of engineers and scientists from every major nation worked in shifts, learning everything they could from the captured ships. In one corner, Indian computer experts discovered they could rewrite Imperial code using Earth's programming languages. In another, Chinese engineers found ways to replicate and modify the Empire's energy systems. Russian scientists worked on understanding their weapons, while European teams studied their navigation technology. Late one night, Dr. Chen made the breakthrough they'd been waiting for. She rushed to the facility's main conference room, where General Hayes was meeting with military leaders. "Their whole empire is built on perfect order," she announced, spreading her diagrams on the table. "Their ships, their weapons, their communication, everything follows exact patterns. They've been doing things the same way for so long, they don't know how to handle anything different." "And humans?" Hayes asked, though she was already smiling. "We're chaotic, unpredictable. We try new things, we improvise, we break patterns," Chen replied. "Everything that makes us primitive in their eyes is actually our strength." Williams nodded from his seat. "Their technology is more advanced, but our approach is more flexible. They can only follow their programming. We can innovate." General Hayes looked at the countdown timer on the wall. 2 weeks remained until the deadline, but for the first time, she felt real hope. "How quickly can we adapt their technology to our systems?" she asked. Chen grinned. "That's the best part. We already have. Humans are very good at taking things apart and putting them back together in new ways. The Empire has no idea what's coming." 10 days before the Empire's deadline, Earth's orbit became very busy. Thousands of satellites, both old and new, moved into new positions. To the Imperial scout ships watching from the edge of the solar system, it might have looked like chaos. But there was a careful plan behind every movement. In the Madagascar facility, Dr. Chen supervised the final preparations. She hadn't slept in 2 days, running on coffee and determination. "All modified satellites are in position," she reported to General Hayes. "Phase 1 is ready." The general stood in the Pentagon's command center, surrounded by screens showing satellite positions and data feeds. Military leaders from 20 countries watched through secure video links. "Begin Operation Ghost Signal," Hayes ordered. Around the world, technicians pressed their buttons almost simultaneously. Suddenly, Earth's orbital network came alive with activity. Each satellite began broadcasting signals copied from the captured Imperial ships, but with subtle changes. "Think of it like shouting in a crowded room," Chen explained to her team. "Except we're shouting in their language, saying things that don't make sense. Their systems won't be able to ignore us, but they also won't be able to understand what we're saying." The effect was immediate. The Imperial scout ships near Pluto began showing signs of confusion. Their perfect formation wavered as their computers tried to process thousands of contradictory Imperial commands. "They're responding exactly as predicted," Major Torres reported. "Their automated systems are trying to verify every signal because they all look official." In space, more of Earth's satellites activated. These carried modified versions of Imperial technology, reverse-engineered from the crashed ships. They began transmitting on frequencies that the Empire thought only they could use. "Second wave activated," Chen announced. "Now we're not just shouting. We're pretending to be their commanders." The Imperial ships' confusion grew more visible. Some began to move in strange patterns, their navigation systems receiving multiple sets of coordinates at once. Others powered up and down their weapons repeatedly, unable to determine if they were in combat or not. Dr. Patel monitored the reaction from his station. "Their network is becoming saturated," he reported with a grin. "They can't tell our fake signals from their real ones. Their perfect system is becoming their perfect prison." But victory wasn't certain yet. A new alert sounded through the command center. "Multiple ships detected," an officer announced. "Large Imperial fleet approaching from beyond Neptune. At least 300 vessels." Hayes nodded grimly. "Right on schedule. They're coming to check why their scouts are acting strange." "Chen, Are we ready for Phase 2? Already starting, Chen replied. She typed rapidly on her keyboard, and more satellites changed their broadcast patterns. We're not just confusing them now. We're feeding them false intelligence about Earth's defenses. On the screens, they could see the Imperial fleet receiving the fake data. The massive ships began spreading out, preparing to face imaginary planetary defenses that didn't exist. They're following standard Imperial protocol, Williams observed, exactly as their programming tells them to. They can't even consider that the data might be false. General Hayes watched as the mighty Imperial fleet broke its tight formation, ships moving to counter threats that weren't there. Earth's real defense was much simpler and much harder for the Empire to fight. Send in the third wave, she ordered. More satellites activated, these broadcasting the most dangerous signals of all corrupted Imperial command codes that would spread through their network like a virus. Now we'll see if an empire built on perfect order can handle a little chaos, Chen said softly, watching the Imperial fleet's confusion grow. They wanted Earth to surrender. Instead, we're teaching them why humanity's messy, adaptable nature is more powerful than their rigid perfection. The Imperial deadline arrived with a sight that made even General Hayes catch her breath. The main invasion fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Mars, and it was massive. Thousands of ships filled the space between Mars and Earth, their metal hulls gleaming in the sunlight. 5,342 vessels detected, Major Torres reported, his voice tense. This is their full invasion force. In the Madagascar facility, Dr. Chen watched the fleet's arrival on multiple screens. They're running their standard communication protocols, she announced. Deploying our countermeasures now. Earth's satellite network activated at full power, flooding space with carefully designed interference. Just as before, the Imperial ships began showing signs of confusion. Navigation systems failed, weapons powered down unexpectedly, and communication channels filled with contradictory orders. But something was different this time. Movement detected, an officer called out. 1/3 of the fleet is changing. On the main screen, they watched as nearly 2,000 Imperial ships suddenly shut down their automated systems. Their lights flickered, then came back on with a different pattern. They're going manual, Chen realized, her eyes widening. They're disconnecting from their network entirely. We didn't think they could do that. The Imperial Admiral's voice boomed across all frequencies, speaking in perfect English. Did you think we wouldn't adapt, humans? Our automated systems may be vulnerable to your tricks, but we can still fight the old way. Hayes grabbed her comlink. All defense forces, prepare for direct engagement. This is not a drill. The manually controlled Imperial ships formed a massive spear formation, aiming straight at Earth. They might not have their advanced targeting systems or perfect coordination, but their weapons still worked. And there were so many of them. Can we stop them? Hayes asked Chen. Our electronic warfare won't work on ships running on manual control, Chen replied, typing frantically. They're slower and less accurate this way, but they're also immune to our interference. The first wave of Imperial ships entered Earth's upper atmosphere. Defense forces around the world activated everything they had. Missiles, energy weapons reverse-engineered from the crashed ships, and every electronic warfare system they could power up. Moscow reporting heavy attacks, an officer called out. Beijing under fire. New Delhi detecting multiple ships approaching. But Earth had one last card to play. Dr. Chen looked at Professor Williams, who nodded grimly. General, Chen said, remember how we said their rigid systems were a weakness? We didn't just study their communication protocols. We learned how their whole empire works. She pressed a series of commands into her computer. While they were busy watching our satellites, we were uploading something special into their network. A message. The truth about what's happening here. What do you mean? Hayes asked, ducking as an explosion rocked the building. The Empire runs on perfect order, perfect obedience, Chen explained. What happens when their own people learn that their invincible fleet was outsmarted by a primitive planet? That their perfect systems had such obvious weaknesses? That their leaders led them into a humiliating defeat? On the screens, they could see the automated portions of the Imperial fleet receiving the new data. Ships began breaking formation as their crews saw the evidence. Footage of the Madagascar crashes, data showing how Earth had turned their own technology against them, proof of their vulnerabilities. Their entire society is built on the belief that their technology makes them superior. Williams added, "We're not just fighting their ships now, we're fighting their whole worldview." The manually controlled ships pressed their attack, but now they were alone. The rest of the fleet hung back, their crews too busy dealing with a threat they had never expected. The truth about their own weakness. The battle for Earth entered its 6th hour. Smoke rose from damaged buildings in major cities, but the planet's defenses held. The manually controlled Imperial ships fought fiercely, but without their advanced systems, they were fighting blind. In the Madagascar Command Center, now running on backup power after a near miss from an Imperial weapon, Dr. Chen monitored the spreading effects of their final weapon. Information. "The virus is spreading through their whole network," she reported. "Not just the fleet here, it's reaching their whole empire. Every ship, every station, every colony is seeing the truth." On the main screen, they watched as more Imperial ships stopped fighting. The footage of Earth, a supposedly primitive planet, outsmarting their perfect systems, was causing chaos throughout their rigid society. New transmission coming in. Major Torres announced suddenly. Multiple sources. They're not from the Imperial Command. The first message appeared on their screens. "This is the Centauri colony. We've seen the Earth data. We want to talk." Then another. Rigel Station standing down, requesting diplomatic contact with Earth. And another. Proxima Fleet declaring independence from Imperial control. Earth's victory proves the system is flawed. General Hayes watched in amazement as more messages poured in. They're not just retreating, she realized. Their whole empire is falling apart. The Imperial Admiral's voice cut through the chaos one last time. "You primitive savages, what have you done?" Dr. Chen took the microphone. "We showed your people the truth," she replied calmly. "In trying to conquer us, you taught us how your technology works. In threatening us, you showed us your weaknesses. In calling us primitive, you revealed your own rigid thinking." Professor Williams added, "Your empire was built on the idea that your way was perfect, but perfection can't adapt. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology. It's our ability to change, to improvise, to find new solutions." The manually controlled ships began retreating. Without support from their automated fleet, and with their own society crumbling around them, they had no choice. Hours later, in a secure conference room, General Hayes read the reports coming in from across space. The empire was fragmenting into independent systems and colonies. Many were reaching out to Earth, not for conquest, but for alliance. "They're fascinated by us," Dr. Chen explained, looking exhausted but happy. "We showed them that there are different ways to solve problems." Many of their people were already questioning the rigid Imperial system. They just needed proof that another way was possible. "So what happens now?" Hayes asked. "Now," Chen smiled, "we teach them about chaos and creativity, about trying new things and learning from failures. And they teach us about their technology, helping us advance in ways we never could have alone." 1 month after the Empire's deadline, Earth's night sky looked very different. Foreign ships hung in orbit, but not as conquerors. They were there as students and teachers, trading knowledge with the humans who had shown them a new way of thinking. In the Madagascar facility, now transformed into Earth's first interstellar diplomatic center, Dr. Chen stood with General Hayes, watching ships land and take off. "They thought they were so superior," Hayes mused. "They never imagined that our primitive ways would be exactly what the galaxy needed." "That's the thing about humans," Chen replied, watching as a group of former Imperial scientists walked by, eagerly discussing new ideas with Earth engineers. We're messy, chaotic, and unpredictable. And that makes us perfect teachers for a galaxy that's been stuck in the same patterns for too long. The Empire had given Earth one warning, thinking they were dealing with primitives who would surrender or die. Instead, they had awakened a force that would transform their entire society. Sometimes, Chen thought, the most powerful weapon isn't technology or strength. It's the ability to show others a different way of thinking.